Captain Mark Drake's boots sank into the lush violet grass of Lumere as he led his squad through the dense jungle. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the sweet, almost cloying scent of alien flora. Towering trees with iridescent leaves stretched toward the planet's twin suns, their light casting shifting, kaleidoscopic shadows on the forest floor. "Stay sharp," Mark growled, his plasma rifle at the ready. "Intel says rebel activity has spiked in this sector." As if on cue, a distant explosion shattered the eerie calm. Smoke billowed above the treetops, the acrid scent quickly replacing the floral aroma. "Looks like the intel wasn't lying," said Lieutenant Sarah Chun, her sharp eyes scanning the treeline. "What's the call, Cap?" Mark's jaw tightened. The explosion was near the royal convoy's route. The Queen of Lumere herself might be in danger. "We move in quiet and fast." "Chun, you're on point." "Torres, watch our six." The squad advanced, weaving through the underbrush with practiced efficiency. The sounds of battle grew louder with each step until they crested a hill. Below, a grim scene unfolded. The royal convoy lay in ruins, its once sleek hovercrafts now burning wreckage. A small group of blue-skinned Lemurians huddled behind an overturned transport, firing desperately at a vastly larger rebel force. In their center stood Queen Lyra, her silver-marked azure skin glowing even amid the chaos. Despite the direness of the situation, she exuded regal authority, barking commands to her guards as plasma bolts whizzed past. Mark's stomach tightened. "Chun, Torres, suppressing fire. Jackson, on me. We're getting her out of there." They charged down the slope, unleashing a hail of plasma bolts. Mark reached the Queen's position, ducking behind cover as explosions rang out around them. Up close, Lyra's piercing silver eyes met his with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Your Majesty," he said, breathless but firm. "We're here to get you out. Are you hurt?" "I am unharmed," she replied, her voice calm despite the chaos. "But my guards will not last long." "Then we're moving. On my signal, head for the treeline. My team will cover you." "And you?" she asked, her tone sharp. Mark allowed himself a tight grin. "I'll be right behind you." Before she could argue, Mark leaped from cover, firing wildly to draw the rebels' attention. His team joined in, creating enough chaos for the Queen and her entourage to make their escape. But as they fled, a rebel sniper locked onto Lyra. Without hesitation, Mark threw himself into the line of fire, a searing plasma bolt slamming into his shoulder. His return shot dropped the sniper, but the pain sent him staggering. Strong hands caught him as he collapsed. Queen Lyra's voice, uncharacteristically soft, was the last thing he heard before the world went black. "You've done enough, soldier. Rest now." Mark awoke in an opulent chamber, the sterile hum of medical equipment blending with the faint trill of alien music. His eyes adjusted to see Queen Lyra seated beside his bed, her gaze unreadable. "Your Majesty," he croaked, attempting to sit up, only to wince as pain lanced through his shoulder. "Rest, Captain Drake," Lyra said, her tone both commanding and gentle. "You're in the royal palace. Our healers have tended to your wounds." The ambush, Mark's thoughts were scattered. "My team? All safe," she assured him. "Thanks to you, Lumere still has its queen." Mark shook his head. "Just doing my job?" Lyra leaned forward, her silver eyes locking onto his. "You did far more than your job, Captain. You saved my life, and in doing so, changed the course of our future." Days later, fully healed thanks to Lemurian medical technology, Mark was summoned to Lyra's private chambers. The regal queen sat on a crystalline throne, flanked by two strikingly different young women. "This is Princess Reyla," Lyra said, gesturing to the elder daughter. Reyla had fierce green eyes, a defiant glare, and a posture that radiated simmering rage. "And this is Princess Lyra." The younger girl offered a shy smile, her gentle demeanor a stark contrast to her sister's. Mark bowed awkwardly. "Your Highnesses?" Rayla's scowl deepened, while Lyra giggled softly. Lyra stood, her voice taking on a formal tone. "Captain Drake, your bravery demands recognition." In Lemurian tradition, Such acts are rewarded with the greatest of honors. And so, I present to you Princess Reyla. The room fell into stunned silence. Mark blinked, certain he'd misheard. Reyla, on the other hand, erupted. "Mother, what?" she snarled, stepping forward as if ready to overturn the throne itself. "You cannot gift me to some human." Silence. Lyra's voice cracked like a whip. "This is not a punishment, but an honor. Captain Drake's valor embodies the values you lack: discipline, loyalty, and humility. He will mentor you and ensure your safety." Mark, still reeling, raised a hand. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, I'm a soldier, not a babysitter." Lyra's gaze bore into him. "You are far more than that, Captain. You are a man of honor, and my daughter needs to learn what that means." Reyla crossed her arms, her fury palpable. "I don't need a human to teach me anything." Lyra ignored her, addressing Mark again. "This is not merely a reward. The rebels grow bolder, and my daughter's safety is paramount. You will protect them both, and perhaps, in the process, teach Reyla what it means to be a true leader." Mark hesitated, glancing between the seething Reyla, the hopeful Lyra, and the resolute Queen. He felt a tug of responsibility, not to the throne, but to the people he had risked his life to save. Finally, he straightened. "I accept, Your Majesty. I'll protect your daughters and do my best to mentor Princess Reyla." Lyra inclined her head. "Thank you, Captain. For the sake of Lumere, I hope you succeed." Reyla's glare promised otherwise. "This isn't over," she hissed, her emerald eyes burning with defiance. Mark sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Somehow, I already knew that." And thus began the most dangerous mission of his life, mentoring a rebellious alien princess who'd rather shoot him than learn from him, and protecting her sweeter, quieter sister, both from rebels and from Reyla's temper. He wasn't sure if he was saving a monarchy or babysitting an intergalactic powder keg. Either way, he'd signed up for one hell of a ride. The first day of Captain Mark Drake's new assignment began like an ambush, chaotic, unpredictable, and punctuated by explosions. Only this time, the explosions were verbal, courtesy of Princess Reyla. Mark stood in the palace courtyard, flanked by towering crystal spires that glimmered under the twin suns of Lumere. The courtyard had been converted into a training ground, its sleek floors now scattered with weapons, dummies, and various alien combat devices. Princess Lyra observed from the sidelines, her wide green eyes filled with curiosity and a hint of amusement. Reyla, on the other hand, looked as though she wanted to murder him with her glare alone. "I'm not doing this," Reyla declared, arms crossed tightly over her armored chest. "I don't need some earthling soldier barking orders at me. I'm already a warrior." Mark pinched the bridge of his nose. "I'm not here to bark orders, Princess. I'm here to teach you how to channel your skills, and maybe not get killed in the process." Reyla's emerald eyes blazed. "I survived 3 assassination attempts last year without your help. What could you possibly teach me?" Mark smirked, stepping closer. "How to avoid a 4th, for starters." Lyra stifled a giggle behind her hand as Reyla's scowl deepened. "Fine," Reyla growled. "You want to teach me? Let's see what you've got, human." She grabbed a nearby training staff, twirling it effortlessly before leveling it at Mark. "Come on, show me how you earthlings fight." Mark raised an eyebrow. "We're supposed to be training, not sparring." Reyla's grin was sharp and predatory. "What's wrong? Afraid you'll embarrass yourself in front of my little sister?" Lyra gasped. "Reyla, don't." But it was too late. The princess lunged, the staff whipping through the air with surprising speed. Mark barely dodged, stepping back to avoid a blow that would have cracked his ribs. "All right," he muttered, sidestepping another strike. "You asked for it." Grabbing a staff of his own, Mark deflected her next attack, the clash of weapons echoing across the courtyard. Reyla pressed him hard, her strikes fast and relentless. But Mark had faced worse: rebel ambushes, sniper fire, even plasma mines. A fiery princess with a grudge? Manageable. He waited for his opening, then parried a particularly wild swing, twisting her staff out of her hands and spinning her off balance. Reyla stumbled, glaring up at him from where she'd landed on her backside. "Lesson 1. Mark said, offering her a hand. Control your temper. Rage makes you predictable. Reyla slapped his hand away, leaping to her feet. You cheated? Lyra giggled. It looked fair to me. Mark crossed his arms, his expression calm. Princess, in a real fight, no one's playing fair. You need to focus, or your enemies will use your anger against you. Reyla's fists clenched, but she said nothing. Instead, she stormed off toward the palace, muttering curses in Lumerian under her breath. Lyra approached, a shy smile on her face. You were brave to challenge her like that. Reyla doesn't take well to being humbled. I noticed, Mark replied dryly. He glanced at the younger princess. You're awfully calm for someone who just watched their sister try to decapitate their new mentor. Lyra shrugged, her demeanor as serene as Reyla's was fiery. Reyla's bark is worse than her bite. Most of the time, Mark chuckled. Good to know. What about you? Are you here to spar too? Lyra shook her head quickly, her cheeks flushing. Oh no, I'm not much of a fighter. Mother says my talents lie elsewhere. Mark raised an eyebrow. Talents like what? Lyra hesitated, then extended her hands. A soft glow emanated from her palms, and the air around them shimmered as a delicate crystal flower began to form. Within seconds, it solidified, perfect and gleaming, before she handed it to him. That's incredible, Mark said, genuinely impressed. You can just create things out of thin air? It's not thin air, Lyra corrected gently. It's manipulating the energy around us. All Lemurians can do it to some degree, but mine's different. More precise. Mark studied the intricate details of the flower. Useful in a fight? Lyra frowned. Not really. But Mother says it's important to balance Reyla's fire with something gentler. Mark nodded, pocketing the crystal flower. Fair enough. Speaking of fire, I should probably go make sure your sister isn't planning to assassinate me. Mark found Reyla in the palace gardens, hacking away at an unfortunate tree with a dagger. Her movements were sharp and furious, each strike carrying the weight of her frustration. Do trees usually bother you? Or am I special? He quipped, leaning against a nearby column. Reyla spun, her eyes flashing. What do you want? To talk, Mark said, keeping his tone neutral. I get it, princess. You don't want me here. You don't think you need me. But if you keep fighting me instead of focusing on the real threats out there, you're going to get yourself, or worse, your sister, killed. Reyla's grip on the dagger tightened. You think I don't care about my sister? I think you care so much it's blinding you, Mark replied. You're so focused on proving yourself that you're ignoring what's right in front of you. Reyla stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Mark thought he'd gotten through to her. Then she scoffed, shoving the dagger back into its sheath. You don't know anything about me, human? Maybe not yet, Mark admitted. But I'm going to, because whether you like it or not, we're stuck with each other. So, how about we make the best of it? Reyla didn't respond. Instead, she brushed past him, disappearing into the palace. Mark sighed, watching her go. Well, that went great. Later that evening, Mark returned to his quarters to find Lyra waiting for him with a tray of alien pastries. I thought you might need this, she said with a small smile. Reyla isn't easy to deal with, but she'll come around. Eventually, Mark took a pastry, biting into it cautiously. It was surprisingly delicious, sweet and tangy with a hint of spice. Thanks, Lyra. You might be the only reason I don't lose my mind during this assignment. Lyra's laughter was soft and musical. You're not so bad yourself, Captain. Just don't give up on her. Reyla has a good heart. She just hides it very, very well. Mark chuckled, leaning back in his chair. I've dealt with worse. But between your sister and the rebels, I'm starting to think saving your mother was the easy part. Lyra's smile faded slightly. The rebels aren't going to stop, you know. They'll come for us again. Mark's expression hardened. Let them. I'll be ready. Outside, the twin moons of Lumere cast their glow over the palace, the night deceptively calm. But Mark knew the peace wouldn't last. Between Reyla's rebellious streak and the looming rebel threat, he had his work cut out for him. And yet, for the first time in years, he felt alive. The palace's grand hall, normally a place of stately gatherings and quiet diplomacy, had been converted into a war room. Holographic maps of Lumere flickered on the obsidian table at the center, projecting an intricate display of rebel hotspots. Mark Drake stood at one end, his sharp eyes scanning the data as Queen Alara and her council debated strategies. Princess Reyla lounged against a pillar, arms crossed, her expression one of disinterest mixed with disdain. Lyra sat nearby, dutifully studying the maps, her soft voice occasionally offering insights that the council largely ignored. Mark cleared his throat, interrupting the heated discussion. "Your Majesty, if I may?" The room fell silent, all eyes on him. Mark gestured toward a cluster of red dots pulsating on the map. "The rebel attacks aren't random. They're creating a perimeter, closing in on the palace. If we don't disrupt their movements now, they'll surround us within weeks." One of the counselors, a tall Lemurian with a haughty expression, scoffed. "And what would you suggest, Earthling? Charging in with your primitive weapons?" Reyla snorted. "Finally, someone gets it." Mark ignored the jab, pointing to another section of the map. "A surgical strike here, at their supply depot, will cripple their operations. We cut off their resources, and their forces will scatter. It's basic tactics." Queen Alara studied him for a moment, her silver-blue eyes thoughtful. "You've proven your valor on the battlefield, Captain Drake, but this is a different kind of war. A war of strategy, politics, and restraint." "With respect, Your Majesty," Mark replied, his voice steady, "I've been fighting wars my whole life. Rebels don't respond to politics. They respond to action." Alara's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded. "Very well. You have my permission to proceed. Take a small team and strike the depot. But remember, Captain, we need prisoners for interrogation. No unnecessary bloodshed." "Yes, ma'am," Mark said, inclining his head. "I'll take a squad of your best fighters." Before the Queen could respond, Reyla pushed off the pillar. "I'm coming with you." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure, Princess? It's not exactly a royal banquet out there." Reyla glared at him. "I'm not asking for your permission, Captain. I'm going." Alara sighed. "Reyla." "It's fine," Mark interrupted. "She can come, but she follows my orders. Out there, rank and title mean nothing." Reyla's smirk was laced with defiance. "We'll see about that." Hours later, Mark, Reyla, and a hand-picked squad of Lemurian soldiers crept through the dense jungles of Lumere. The twin moons cast eerie light through the foliage, illuminating the shimmering plants and the occasional flutter of alien wildlife. The team moved in silence, their footsteps muffled by the violet grass. Mark glanced over his shoulder at Reyla, who had traded her royal robes for sleek combat armor. She moved with the confidence of someone who had seen her share of battles, but her fiery personality still radiated beneath the surface. "Stay close," Mark whispered. "The depot's just ahead." Reyla rolled her eyes. "I know how to follow, Captain." The group came to a halt at the edge of a clearing. In the center stood the rebels' supply depot, a cluster of makeshift buildings surrounded by guards armed with plasma rifles. The air hummed with the sound of generators and the occasional crackle of a communication relay. Mark pulled out a pair of binoculars, scanning the area. 6 guards on patrol, 2 by the entrance. Snipers on the north tower. "What do you see, Princess?" Reyla squinted at the depot, her expression thoughtful. "They're overconfident. The guards are sloppy, their patrols are uneven, and their supply crates are too exposed. A diversion here," she pointed to a nearby outcropping, "would draw them away from the main storage." Mark nodded, impressed despite himself. "Not bad. All right, here's the plan. We split into 2 teams. Team Alpha creates the diversion, while Team Beta infiltrates the storage area." "Reyla, you're with me?" Reyla smirked. "Of course I am." The plan began smoothly. A carefully timed explosion near the outcropping sent the rebels scrambling, leaving the storage area vulnerable. Mark and Reyla slipped through the shadows, their movements synchronized as they approached the supply crates. Mark knelt beside a crate, planting a small explosive charge. 5 minutes, he whispered. "Then we're out." Reyla, covering him, suddenly tensed. "We got company." Mark turned to see a group of rebels returning, plasma rifles raised. "Stay low," he ordered, raising his own weapon. But Reyla, true to form, didn't listen. She charged forward with a battle cry, her plasma blade igniting in a blaze of green light. The rebels shouted in alarm as she tore into their ranks, her movements a blur of lethal precision. Mark sighed, covering her with suppressing fire. So much for stealth. Reyla dispatched the last rebel with a swift strike, her chest heaving as she turned to him. "You're welcome." "That wasn't the plan," Mark snapped, pulling her behind cover as more rebels began converging on their location. "You just blew our timeline. We would have been caught anyway," Reyla shot back. "At least now we're fighting on our terms." Their argument was cut short by a sudden explosion. The charge Mark had planted detonated, sending shockwaves through the depot. Supplies ignited, and flames licked at the edges of the clearing. "Time to go," Mark shouted, dragging Reyla toward the extraction point. As they ran, plasma bolts rained down around them. One struck a tree near Reyla, the impact sending her sprawling. Mark skidded to a halt, turning back to help her up. "Move," he barked, firing at the advancing rebels. Reyla glared at him, but took his offered hand. Together, they sprinted toward the extraction site, where their team waited with a cloaked hovercraft. The rebels pursued, their shouts echoing through the jungle, but the craft's engines roared to life, and they lifted off just in time. Back at the palace, Mark and Reyla stood before Queen Alara in the war room. The queen's expression was unreadable as she listened to their report. "The mission was a success," Mark concluded. "We destroyed their supplies and recovered a prisoner for interrogation. And the unnecessary risks?" Alara asked, her gaze shifting to Reyla. Reyla opened her mouth to argue, but Mark stepped in. "The princess fought bravely, Your Majesty. Her tactics helped ensure our success." Reyla blinked, surprised, but said nothing. Alara studied them both, then nodded. "Very well. But remember, Captain, you are here to guide my daughter, not shield her from consequences." Mark inclined his head. "Understood, Your Majesty." As they left the war room, Reyla caught his arm. "Why did you cover for me?" Mark shrugged. "Because you're good, Reyla. But you need to learn when to fight and when to fall back. Next time, stick to the plan." Reyla hesitated, then nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. "Next time, Captain." Mark smirked. "Good? Because the rebels aren't done with us yet." The royal palace hummed with tension in the days following the raid. The rebel prisoner Mark's team had captured, a wiry Lumerian with deep scars tracing his arms, offered no useful intelligence during questioning. The rebels' true motives and their mysterious leader remained an enigma, heightening the strain on everyone. Mark's quarters were a rare sanctuary of quiet amidst the chaos. He stood at the window, gazing out at the city of Lumere spread beneath the twilight sky. Twin moons bathed the crystalline spires and shimmering streets in a silvery glow. Despite the breathtaking view, Mark's thoughts were far from tranquil. The door chimed, breaking his reverie. "Come in," he called. The door slid open to reveal Lyra, her gentle demeanor as calm as ever. She held a tray with 2 cups of steaming liquid. "You've been working nonstop, Captain Drake. I thought you could use a break." Mark chuckled and gestured to the small table near the window. "Thanks, Princess. I could use one." Lyra placed the tray down, taking the seat across from him. "You did well in the jungle. Mother says the mission was a success." "Success is relative," Mark replied, taking a sip of the drink. It was sweet, with a hint of spice, and seemed to melt the tension in his shoulders. "We took out their supplies, but we're no closer to stopping the rebellion." Lyra folded her hands, her expression thoughtful. "You're hard on yourself, Captain. You save lives. That's more than most would do." Mark smiled faintly. "Thanks, but we're still in a war. Every day we delay, the rebels gain ground." The door chimed again, and this time it was Reyla who entered, her stride confident and her face set in a familiar scowl. "Am I interrupting the bonding session?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Mark sighed. "What do you want, Reyla?" She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Mother wants to see you in the council chamber. Something about new intelligence." Mark stood, placing his cup down. "Great. More bad news, I'm sure." Lyra rose as well, placing a hand on Reyla's arm. "Reyla, you could try being less combative." Reyla smirked. "Where's the fun in that?" Mark shook his head, heading toward the door. Let's get this over with. The council chamber was abuzz with activity when Mark arrived. Holographic displays showed new rebel movements, their forces massing in a remote sector of the jungle. Queen Alara stood at the head of the room, her commanding presence silencing the chatter as she began to speak. Our scouts have discovered the location of a major rebel stronghold, she said, gesturing to the map. It appears to be a supply hub, possibly even a command center. Mark studied the display. If we hit this, it could cripple their operations for good. Exactly, Alara said. But this isn't a simple assault. The stronghold is heavily fortified, and our forces can't risk an open confrontation. This requires precision. Mark's eyes narrowed. You're talking about a covert operation? Alara nodded. A small team, infiltrating the stronghold to gather intelligence and, if possible, dismantle their operations from within. Reyla stepped forward. I'm going. Mark groaned inwardly. Reyla! Save it, she snapped. I know the terrain, and I've trained for this. You need me? She's right, Alara interjected. Reyla's knowledge of the jungle and the rebel tactics will be invaluable. She goes. Mark glanced at Reyla, whose expression dared him to argue. He sighed. Fine, but we do this my way. Alara's gaze softened slightly. Captain Drake, I trust you to ensure the safety of both my daughter and this mission. Do not let me down. Mark, Reyla, and their team moved through the jungle under cover of darkness. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of nocturnal creatures echoed around them. Mark kept his senses sharp, scanning for any sign of danger. Reyla walked beside him, her plasma blade clipped to her side. You're awfully quiet, she remarked. Just focused, Mark replied. This isn't a game, Reyla. One mistake could get us all killed. Her green eyes flashed in the dim light. I know what's at stake, Captain. You don't need to lecture me. Before Mark could respond, the scout at the front of their group raised a fist, signaling a halt. Mark crouched beside him, peering through the dense foliage. Ahead, the rebel stronghold loomed, a cluster of fortified buildings surrounded by towering walls and patrolled by armed guards. Mark gestured for the team to fan out. We'll enter through the south perimeter, he whispered. Minimal guards, and it's close to the main power generator. Take it out, and we'll have the advantage. Reyla nodded, her face set in determination. Let's move. The team slipped through the perimeter undetected, their movements silent and precise. Mark led the way to the power generator, a large cylindrical structure humming with energy. Reyla knelt beside him as he set up the explosive charges. You're surprisingly good at this, she whispered. I've had practice, Mark replied, his focus on the task. The charges were armed, and the team moved to a safe distance. Mark pressed the detonator, and the generator erupted in a shower of sparks and flame. The base was plunged into darkness, alarms blaring as chaos erupted. Go! Mark shouted, leading the team deeper into the base. Their objective was the command center, where vital intelligence could turn the tide of the war. Reyla's plasma blade lit the way as they encountered resistance, cutting through guards with ruthless efficiency. Mark covered her, his plasma rifle picking off enemies from the shadows. They reached the command center, its doors sealed tight. Reyla, you're up, Mark said. She stepped forward, slicing through the locking mechanism with precision. The door slid open, revealing a room filled with data terminals and holographic displays. Mark moved quickly, downloading data onto a portable drive. As the process completed, he heard footsteps approaching, heavy, hurried. We've got company, Reyla warned, igniting her blade. Mark turned to face the doorway as a squad of rebels stormed in. Hold them off, he shouted. Reyla grinned. With pleasure. After a brutal fight, the team escaped the stronghold with the data in hand. Back at the palace, Mark and Reyla presented their findings to Queen Alara. But as the data was decrypted, a chilling revelation emerged. The rebels weren't just fighting for political freedom. They were searching for something ancient, buried deep beneath Lumere's surface. A weapon? A relic? The data was incomplete, but it was clear the stakes had just been raised. Queen Alara's expression darkened. This changes everything. If the rebels find this artifact, it could spell doom for us all. Mark exchanged a glance with Reyla. Looks like we got a bigger fight ahead of us. Reyla smirked, her green eyes gleaming. Good. I was getting bored,